Have you ever wondered what would happen if the United States military took the ancient wisdom of Native American tracking and warfare techniques and combined it with modern military tactics? What if I told you this actually happened, and that a covert operation during World War II brought together America's most skilled indigenous warriors from various tribes to form an elite commando unit so secretive that not even our own soldiers knew they existed? A unit that operated deep within the Rocky Mountains, training in absolute secrecy, while German spies desperately tried to uncover their location. Before we continue with this incredible story, comment below what state you're from, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. We need your support to keep uncovering these hidden chapters of American history that have been buried for decades. In the winter of 1942, as the United States was fully mobilizing for war following the attack on Pearl Harbor, a classified military initiative known as Operation Ghostwalker was quietly established by the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to today's CIA. The program began when Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Fairbanks, a military intelligence officer with Cherokee heritage, proposed a radical idea to OSS Director William Donovan: recruit America's most skilled indigenous trackers, hunters, and warriors from various tribes to create an elite reconnaissance and sabotage unit that would operate using techniques unknown to European military doctrine. The reasoning was simple but brilliant. German military intelligence had extensively studied American military tactics and training. But what they couldn't anticipate or counter were the ancient indigenous warfare methods that predated European contact, skills passed down through generations that remained undocumented in any military manual. "The enemy knows how we fight," Fairbanks wrote in his classified proposal, recently declassified in 2015. "They don't know how our original warriors fought. This is an advantage we must exploit." The location chosen for this top-secret training program was a remote valley deep within the Rocky Mountains in an area known today as the Thunder Basin, accessible only by a treacherous mountain pass that was nearly impossible to find without a guide. The natural fortress provided the perfect isolation needed for complete operational security. Recruitment was handled personally by Fairbanks and a small team of trusted officers. They traveled to reservations across the country, seeking men with specific skills, expert trackers from the Apache, Navajo, and Comanche nations, silent hunters from the Cheyenne and Sioux, wilderness survival experts from the Nez Perce and Salish, and warriors skilled in hand-to-hand combat from the Iroquois Confederacy. One such recruit was John Two Rivers, a 24-year-old Lakota Sioux who had grown up learning the traditional hunting and tracking methods of his ancestors. They came to the reservation asking for men who could track a deer for 3 days without being detected. Two Rivers recalled in a rare interview given shortly before his death in 2012. "I thought I was signing up for regular army service. We all did. It wasn't until we arrived at that hidden valley that we learned what they really wanted us for." By March 1943, 93 indigenous men from 17 different tribal nations had been assembled in the Thunder Basin. Their training facility consisted of crude wooden structures built into the mountainside, nearly invisible from the air. No radio communications were permitted. No mail went in or out. As far as the outside world was concerned, these men had simply disappeared into the regular military machine. Major Robert Hawkins, a hardened veteran of unconventional warfare, was placed in charge of developing the training program. His journal, partially released under the Freedom of Information Act, provides a rare glimpse into the program's early days. "These men arrive with skills our regular soldiers could never hope to match," he wrote on April 2, 1943. "Yesterday I watched a Mohawk recruit named Wilson move through dense forest without disturbing a single branch or making a sound that could be detected from 10 feet away. Our conventional military training would have destroyed these instincts rather than honing them." The training regimen combined traditional indigenous skills with modern military tactics. The men learned to operate behind enemy lines for extended periods, navigate without maps or compasses, track enemy movements through any terrain, and eliminate targets silently using both traditional weapons and modern firearms. One of the most remarkable aspects of the program was the development of a unique communication system. While the Navajo code talkers are well known to history, the Thunder Basin unit developed something even more sophisticated, a system of bird calls, animal sounds, and natural noises that could convey complex tactical information across vast distances without alerting the enemy. We could communicate everything from enemy positions to planned rendezvous points using sounds that would be dismissed as normal forest noise, explained former commando Daniel Running Deer in classified testimony to military historians in 1978. A series of owl hoots, followed by the call of a mountain jay, followed by 3 wolf howls might mean 20 enemy soldiers moving northeast, heavily armed, unaware of our position. By summer 1943, German intelligence had become aware that some kind of special operations unit was being formed, though they had no details about its composition or capabilities. Nazi spies operating in the United States were given urgent orders to locate the training facility and gather intelligence on the unit. What followed was an intense shadow war played out across the American West. German agents, some posing as traveling salesmen or journalists, began investigating military movements in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. They bribed local officials, established listening posts near known military installations, and attempted to infiltrate supply chains. What they didn't know was that the Indigenous Commandos were already tracking them. "We were aware of German surveillance efforts almost immediately," recalled James White Eagle, an Apache scout who served as the unit's chief of counterintelligence. "Our men were stationed in towns throughout the region, watching for unfamiliar faces asking too many questions. The Germans were looking for conventional military security, uniformed guards, fenced compounds, radio transmissions. We had none of these things. Our security was the mountain itself and our own abilities to remain unseen." In one particularly daring operation in September 1943, a team of 5 commandos tracked a German spy cell operating out of Denver for 2 weeks, documenting their communications and identifying their entire network without ever being detected. The information they gathered led to the arrest of 17 German agents by the FBI. The Germans became increasingly desperate to locate the mysterious unit. In October 1943, they dispatched Klaus Hermann, one of their most skilled intelligence officers, to personally lead the search. Hermann had successfully penetrated Allied operations in North Africa and was considered a master of fieldcraft and disguise. Unknown to Hermann, his arrival in Colorado Springs was noted by 2 feathers: a Crow operative who spotted inconsistencies in Hermann's cover identity as a Swiss businessman. Rather than apprehend him immediately, Colonel Fairbanks made a bold decision. They would allow Hermann to operate, feeding him misleading information while studying German intelligence methods. For 6 weeks, Hermann traveled throughout the Rocky Mountain region, following false leads planted by the Indigenous operatives. He was permitted to uncover enough accurate information to keep his superiors satisfied, while the true location and nature of the Thunder Basin facility remained secure. "We led him on a merry chase," White Eagle later recalled. He would find a clue that pointed to Montana, then to a remote corner of Wyoming, then back to Colorado. All the while he was passing within miles of our actual location without ever knowing it. The game came to an end in December 1943, when Hermann, frustrated by his lack of progress, attempted to bribe a local hunting guide to take him into restricted areas of the mountains. The guide, an undercover member of the unit, led Hermann to a remote cabin where he was quietly apprehended. The interrogation of Hermann revealed something that shocked even the hardened OSS officers. The Germans had fundamentally misunderstood what they were searching for. They had been looking for a conventional military facility with advanced technology or weapons. The idea that the Americans were developing a unit based on indigenous skills never occurred to them. "It is a blindness born of arrogance," Fairbanks wrote after debriefing Hermann. "The Germans, with their belief in their own technological and tactical superiority, cannot conceive of warfare that returns to the land and ancient wisdom. This is precisely why our approach will succeed." By early 1944, the first operational teams from Thunder Basin were ready for deployment. Their initial missions remain heavily classified, but declassified fragments indicate they operated primarily in the European theater, particularly in the mountainous regions of Italy, France, and later Germany itself. One partially declassified mission involved a 4-man team inserted into the Black Forest, in January 1945. The team, comprised of 2 Apache scouts, a Cheyenne tracker, and a Seneca specialist in silent elimination, operated behind German lines for 43 days. During this time, they gathered critical intelligence on German troop movements during the final phases of the Battle of the Bulge, eliminated 14 high-value targets without raising alarms, and sabotaged key supply lines. What made these operations unique was their psychological impact. German troops began reporting encounters with phantom warriors who seemed to materialize from the forests, strike with devastating precision, and disappear without a trace. Survivors reported hearing strange animal calls before attacks, creating a climate of fear and superstition among German units stationed in remote areas. A captured German officer's journal contained this telling entry. The men speak of forest demons that hunt in the night. Rational minds know this is nonsense. But when entire outposts are found with guards eliminated without a sound, when our wire communications are cut by unseen hands, when our officers disappear from their tents leaving no trace, even I begin to wonder what manner of enemy we face. The psychological warfare aspect of the unit's operations was intentionally amplified. Team members would sometimes leave subtle indigenous symbols carved into trees near attack sites, or create patterns with enemy equipment that held significant meaning in their tribal traditions but appeared random to European eyes. "We wanted them afraid of the dark," explained Daniel Running Deer. "We wanted them jumping at shadows and wasting ammunition, firing at noises in the night." A frightened enemy makes mistakes. As the war in Europe progressed, Thunder Basin operatives were instrumental in several key operations that have only recently been acknowledged. They guided Allied special forces through supposedly impassable mountain routes in Italy, allowing for surprise attacks on German positions. They located and provided intelligence on Nazi scientific research facilities hidden in remote locations. In the final months of the war, they tracked fleeing Nazi officials attempting to escape justice. Yet despite their contributions, the existence of the Indigenous Commando program remained one of America's most closely guarded secrets. When the war ended, the men of Thunder Basin returned to civilian life under strict orders never to reveal their true wartime activities. "We came home to reservations where conditions were often desperate," John Two Rivers recalled. "Men who had saved countless Allied lives were now treated as second-class citizens again. We were told our missions were too sensitive to acknowledge, that recognizing our service might compromise future operations using similar methods. For decades, these indigenous warriors kept their silence. Their extraordinary contributions remained hidden in classified files, their story untold." But the strangest chapter of the Thunder Basin saga was yet to unfold. In the early 1950s, as Cold War tensions escalated, a series of unusual events suggested that not all aspects of the program had been shut down after World War II. Some veterans reported being quietly approached about potential operations against Soviet interests. Others noticed unusual surveillance of their activities. Most disturbing were the reports of former team members who disappeared without explanation. "There were whispers that some kind of continuation program was operating," said James White Eagle in his final interview. "Men with the right skills would receive a visit, usually at night. They would pack a small bag and tell their families they had found work somewhere distant. Some never returned." Military records indicate that a number of Thunder Basin veterans died under mysterious circumstances in the decade following the war. Official causes ranged from hunting accidents to car crashes to sudden illnesses. Yet in many cases, family members reported inconsistencies in the official accounts or strange visitors asking questions about the deceased's wartime activities. One such case was that of Thomas Blackfoot, a Nez Perce tracker who had served on multiple missions in Germany. In August 1954, Blackfoot supposedly died when his truck went off a mountain road in Idaho. Yet his brother insisted that Thomas had mentioned being contacted about finishing old business just days before his death, and that the body in the crashed truck was burned beyond recognition. Was Thunder Basin reactivated for Cold War operations? Did some of its methodologies continue in other classified programs? The full truth remains elusive, buried in still classified documents, and carried to graves by men who honored their oath of secrecy to the end. What we do know is that the Thunder Basin training methods influenced the development of special operations tactics that continue to this day. Techniques first developed by indigenous commandos in those remote Rocky Mountain valleys have been incorporated into the training of elite units ranging from Navy SEALs to Army Special Forces. Perhaps most telling is a quote attributed to a senior CIA official in a partially redacted memo from 1968. The Thunder Basin approach remains our most successful template for human intelligence operations in denied areas. When technology fails, when conventional tactics are anticipated, we return to the methods that kept us invisible in plain sight. In 2005, a memorial was quietly established at Fort Carson, Colorado, honoring the Native American Special Operations Units of World War II. The monument makes no specific mention of Thunder Basin or Operation Ghostwalker, but those who know the history recognize the tribute for what it is. Today, as you drive through certain remote areas of the Rocky Mountains, you might pass within miles of the former Thunder Basin facility without ever knowing it. Nature has reclaimed most of the structures, and government maps still mark the area with deliberately misleading topographical features. But according to local indigenous elders, the mountains remember what happened there. Some speak of feeling a distinctive presence when passing through certain valleys, a watchfulness that never quite faded away after the program ended. Those mountains were chosen for a reason, explained Robert Three Bears, an elder whose uncle served in the program. Our people always knew they had power. The spirits of those places protected our warriors then, and they guard their memories now. In 2008, historian Margaret Reynolds began researching the Thunder Basin program after discovering references to it in declassified OSS documents. Her requests for further information were repeatedly denied on national security grounds, but through interviews with families of deceased program members and careful analysis of available records, she pieced together parts of the story. What struck me most was how the program represented a brief moment when the U.S. military recognized the value of indigenous knowledge, Reynolds noted in her controversial book, Shadow Warriors. These weren't just men being used for their physical skills, they were respected as carriers of wisdom that Western military science couldn't replicate. Reynolds' research uncovered another remarkable aspect of the program that had remained hidden: the role of indigenous medicine men and spiritual leaders who were brought into Thunder Basin as advisors. There was a spiritual dimension to the training that official records barely mention, and she wrote, multiple sources confirmed that traditional ceremonies and spiritual practices were incorporated into the program. The military officers in charge came to understand that for many indigenous warriors, spiritual preparation was as important as physical training. One such spiritual advisor was Joseph Standing Bear, a respected Blackfoot medicine man who was officially listed as a cultural liaison in the sparse records that have been declassified. According to accounts from program veterans, Standing Bear taught techniques for maintaining mental clarity during extended missions, traditional methods for moving in harmony with natural forces, and spiritual practices for warriors facing mortal danger. Before each mission, we would participate in ceremonies led by the elders, Daniel Running Deer recalled. These weren't superstitions to us. They were essential preparations that had guided our ancestors through countless battles. What surprised us was seeing some of the white officers eventually joining these ceremonies, recognizing their power. Lieutenant William Harrison, one of the few non-Indigenous officers attached to the program, left a remarkable account in his personal journal, which his family made public in 1997. What I've witnessed in this valley has transformed my understanding of warfare, he wrote in June 1943. Yesterday, I observed a Lakota warrior named Swifthawk track a target through rocky terrain where tracking seemed impossible. When I asked how he could follow a trail I couldn't see, he explained that he wasn't just looking for physical signs. He was feeling the disturbance in the energy of the place, sensing where the natural harmony had been interrupted. I would have dismissed this as mysticism before coming here. Now I've seen too much to doubt. The spiritual aspects of the Thunder Basin program later became a point of contention within military leadership. Some officers argued that these elements should be stripped from the training methodology, when aspects of the program were incorporated into conventional special operations training after the war. Others insisted that the indigenous approach had to be understood as a complete system, with the spiritual components inseparable from the physical techniques. This debate continues in classified circles today, according to sources within the special operations community who spoke on condition of anonymity. There are still those who understand that the most effective warriors are those who connect to something deeper than tactical doctrine. One retired special operations instructor explained, "The Thunder Basin legacy lives on in certain aspects of our most classified training programs, though you won't find it acknowledged in any manual." Perhaps the most compelling evidence of the program's lasting impact comes from recently declassified Soviet intelligence reports from the Cold War era. The KGB had become aware of the American shadow warriors through interrogation of captured German officers and launched their own investigation into the program. A 1954 KGB assessment, translated and released in 2017, contains this revealing analysis. The Americans have developed an approach to special operations that defies conventional counters. These indigenous operatives do not rely on technology we can detect or jam, communications we can intercept, or tactics we can anticipate. They represent a return to ancient methods of warfare that our modern security systems are not designed to detect. The report goes on to recommend that Soviet intelligence prioritize the identification and elimination of any continuing Thunder Basin operations, suggesting that the Soviets considered the indigenous commandos a significant threat. This Soviet concern may explain some of the mysterious deaths and disappearances of Thunder Basin veterans during the Cold War. Were Soviet agents targeting these men to eliminate a capability they feared? The evidence remains circumstantial but suggestive. What is certain is that the Thunder Basin facility itself was not completely abandoned after World War II. Satellite imagery declassified in 2019 shows that the site remained active well into the 1970s, with periodic construction and maintenance taking place despite no official acknowledgement of its existence. In 1972, a group of hikers who had strayed from marked trails reported being intercepted by men they described as Native Americans in civilian clothes, who firmly but politely escorted them away from a valley they had been approaching. When they reported the incident to local authorities, they were told they had accidentally entered a prohibited watershed area. No such restriction appeared on any public maps. For the families of the Thunder Basin operators, the decades of secrecy took a heavy toll. Many went to their graves without public recognition of their service. Children and grandchildren grew up knowing their relatives had served in the war, but forbidden from knowing the true nature of their contributions. Sarah Blackcloud, daughter of Cheyenne Commando Michael Blackcloud, described growing up with the weight of unspoken secrets. "My father would wake up screaming some nights," she recalled. "When I asked my mother what was wrong, she would just say he had seen difficult things during the war. It wasn't until after he died that a man from the government came to our house and told me that my father had been a hero who had saved many American lives through missions he could never talk about." In 2012, a group of Thunder Basin descendants formed the Indigenous Special Operations Historical Society, dedicated to preserving the legacy of the program and advocating for fuller declassification of records related to their family members' service. "These men deserve to have their stories told," said Jennifer Two Rivers, granddaughter of John Two Rivers. "Not just for their families, but for all Americans to understand this unique chapter in our military history, when ancient indigenous wisdom combined with modern warfare to defeat fascism." The Society's efforts have met with limited success. While the government has acknowledged the general existence of indigenous special operations units during World War II, most specific details about Thunder Basin missions, techniques, and casualties remain classified. Military historians speculate that this continued secrecy may be due to the ongoing relevance of Thunder Basin methodologies to current special operations. If the techniques developed there remain in use, revealing their full nature could compromise active programs. Dr. Robert Chandler, a military historian specializing in unconventional warfare, explained, The Thunder Basin approach represented a fundamentally different paradigm of special operations, one that emphasized complete harmony with the environment, spiritual as well as physical preparation, and techniques passed down through oral tradition rather than written doctrine. These approaches are inherently difficult to counter because they operate outside the framework of conventional military thinking. The continued classification of Thunder Basin records has given rise to numerous theories about what really happened in those remote mountain valleys. Some border on the fantastic, claims of supernatural abilities developed through indigenous spiritual practices, or allegations that the program discovered phenomena that Western science couldn't explain. Most veterans who have broken their silence dismiss such sensationalized accounts. As Daniel Running Deer put it in his final interview, "We weren't superhuman. We were men who carried the knowledge of our ancestors, knowledge that had been refined over thousands of years of living in harmony with the land. That knowledge, combined with modern weapons and intelligence techniques, made us effective warriors. The mystery isn't that we could do these things. The mystery is that so much of this knowledge was nearly lost through the destruction of our cultures." Yet even the skeptical Dr. Reynolds acknowledges that some aspects of the Thunder Basin techniques defy conventional explanation. There are documented cases of Thunder Basin operators demonstrating abilities that we struggle to explain through current understanding of human capabilities, she noted. The ability to sense the presence of hidden observers at extraordinary distances, to communicate complex information through subtle environmental manipulation, to predict enemy movements through what they described as reading the energies. These accounts come from reliable witnesses, including conventional military officers not given to mystical thinking. In 2014, a watershed moment occurred when the Department of Defense formally acknowledged the contributions of indigenous special operations units to the Allied victory in World War II. A ceremony at the Pentagon honored the few surviving veterans and family representatives of those who had passed. While the official acknowledgement carefully avoided specific mention of Thunder Basin or details of classified missions, it represented the first public recognition of these warriors' service. Colonel James Whitefeather, one of the last surviving Thunder Basin operators, attended the ceremony at the age of 93. His brief remarks captured the essence of what made the program unique. "We came from nations that had been conquered, from peoples who had been told our ways were primitive and obsolete. Yet when America faced its greatest threat, it turned to those same ancient ways for salvation. The wisdom of our ancestors helped defeat an evil that threatened the entire world. That wisdom remains alive, waiting for those humble enough to learn from it." In the years since that ceremony, interest in the Thunder Basin program has grown, sparked in part by the increasing declassification of World War II records and growing recognition of indigenous contributions to American military history. Several documentaries have attempted to tell the story, working around the gaps in the official record with interviews and circumstantial evidence. Yet the full truth of what happened in those mountain valleys and the full scope of these indigenous commandos' contributions to the Allied victory remains elusive, preserved in classified files, carried in the memories of the few surviving participants sworn to secrecy, and perhaps whispered in the wind that moves through certain remote valleys in the Rocky Mountains. What is clear is that at a crucial moment in history, the United States military recognized the value of indigenous wisdom that had been systematically suppressed for generations. In doing so, they created one of the most effective special operations programs ever developed, one whose influence continues to shape American special warfare doctrine today. For those who know where to look, evidence of the Thunder Basin legacy can be found in the training of modern elite units. The emphasis on moving in harmony with the environment rather than fighting against it, the techniques for operating without technological support in remote areas, the psychological warfare approaches that target the enemy's perception rather than just their physical capabilities, all bear the unmistakable imprint of indigenous warfare philosophy. As global conflicts increasingly involve asymmetric warfare and operations in remote environments, the Thunder Basin approach has found renewed relevance. Modern special operations forces face many of the same challenges that indigenous warriors navigated for centuries. how to move undetected through hostile territory, how to survive with minimal support, how to defeat a numerically superior enemy through superior knowledge of the terrain. In many ways, we've come full circle, explained a current special operations instructor who requested anonymity due to the classified nature of his work. The high-tech solutions don't always work. Electronics fail, satellites can be jammed, communications can be intercepted. When that happens, we fall back on the fundamentals that those indigenous commandos mastered, reading the land, moving as part of nature rather than against it, understanding the mind of the enemy. Perhaps the most powerful testament to the Thunder Basin legacy comes from a letter written by Lieutenant Colonel Fairbanks to his superior officers as the program was being shut down in 1945. Recently declassified, it reads in part, "What we have witnessed here is not merely the development of effective combat techniques, but a profound lesson in humility. We have been reminded that true wisdom does not always advance in a straight line. Sometimes it requires us to circle back to knowledge we nearly lost, knowledge carried by peoples we nearly destroyed. If there is a lesson to be taken from Thunder Basin beyond its tactical successes, it is this. No culture has a monopoly on wisdom, and in our arrogance, we may discard the very knowledge most crucial to our survival." As the sun sets over the Rocky Mountains today, those words carry a resonance that extends far beyond military matters. In a world facing unprecedented environmental and social challenges, the Thunder Basin story reminds us that ancient wisdom and modern knowledge, indigenous perspectives and technological innovation need not be opposing forces. When combined with respect and understanding, they may offer solutions we desperately need. For the descendants of the Thunder Basin warriors, this is the true legacy they hope to preserve, not just the story of their ancestors' battlefield prowess, but the reminder that wisdom comes in many forms, from many cultures, and that our greatest strength lies in our ability to learn from traditions different from our own. The full truth of what happened in those remote valleys may never be known to the public. Some secrets, it seems, will continue to be guarded by classified documents, by the silence of those sworn to secrecy, and perhaps by the mountains themselves, standing watch over stories only they witnessed in full. But one thing remains certain. While the Germans searched frantically for the source of these ghost warriors who haunted their operations and shattered their sense of security, the answer was hidden in plain sight, in the ancient traditions of America's first peoples, carried in the hearts and minds of warriors whose greatest weapon was wisdom the enemy could never understand. As we face uncertain times ahead, perhaps there's a lesson here for all of us. Sometimes the knowledge we most need isn't found in the latest technology or the newest theory, but in wisdom that has been tested by time, preserved through generations, and shared by those who remember the old ways. Remember that as you look to the mountains. There are stories there still waiting to be heard, if we have the humility to listen. And as we face our own battles in life, whatever they may be, let us remember the courage of those indigenous warriors who used their ancestral knowledge to combat one of the greatest evils the world has ever known. Their example reminds us that no matter how dark the times, the light of wisdom and courage can never be fully extinguished. May we all find the strength to stand against darkness in our own time, guided by the light of truth and the wisdom of those who came before us. For as Scripture tells us, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In the end, it is not military might that truly saves us, but the eternal light of God's truth and love, which has guided the footsteps of the righteous through every dark valley in human history. In the decades following World War II, as the Thunder Basin program faded into classified obscurity, strange reports began to emerge from remote areas of Europe where the indigenous commandos had once operated. Local villages in the Black Forest region of Germany, the mountainous areas of northern Italy, and certain valleys in the French Alps told stories of encounters with mysterious figures who seemed to appear and disappear at will. These accounts, dismissed by authorities as local superstition, described men who moved silently through forests, communicated through animal calls, and left behind small, intricate symbols carved into trees. Most were reported between 1945 and 1965, though occasional stories continue to surface even today. Have you ever wondered if some of those commandos never really came home? What if I told you that evidence suggests some Thunder Basin operatives may have remained in Europe after the war ended, continuing a mission so classified that even their own government denied their existence? Before we continue with this chilling possibility, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel. We need your support to keep uncovering these hidden stories that powerful interests have tried to keep buried for generations. In 1957, a classified CIA assessment of Soviet activities in East Germany made a puzzling reference to indigenous assets operating outside official parameters who were providing intelligence on Russian military movements through the region. The document, declassified only in 2018, noted that these operatives were utilizing methodology consistent with Thunder Basin protocols, but were not responding to authorized command channels. Who were these operatives, and under whose authority were they acting, if not the official U.S. command structure? Samuel Blackhawk, nephew of Thunder Basin Commando David Blackhawk, spent 20 years investigating his uncle's mysterious disappearance in 1947. According to family accounts, David had returned from the war, spent 6 months on the reservation, and then told his family he had one more mission before disappearing forever. The official story was that he'd abandoned his family and moved to California, Samuel explained in a 2010 interview. But my father always insisted this was impossible. My uncle was devoted to our people and our ways. He would never have left without saying goodbye, without passing down his knowledge. Samuel's investigation led him to a small village in Bavaria in 1988, where he discovered local legends of an American Indian who had lived in a remote cabin from the late 1940s until his death in 1972. The descriptions matched his uncle, and village records indicated the man had occasionally provided guide services to American personnel stationed in Germany. More disturbing was Samuel's discovery that at least 7 other Thunder Basin veterans had similarly disappeared in the years following the war. In each case, the official record indicated they had relocated, succumbed to illness, or died in accidents. Yet family members reported similar stories of final conversations suggesting one last mission or unfinished business. I believe my uncle and others stayed behind or were sent back to Europe to continue operations that were too sensitive to acknowledge, Samuel concluded. Whether they did this voluntarily or under duress, I cannot say. But I know they never truly abandoned their families. Their duty to their country forced them to make an impossible choice. Dr. Reynolds' research uncovered another startling possibility. Her interviews with Thunder Basin families revealed that many of the veterans had reported strange visitations in the years after the war, encounters with officials who asked detailed questions about their wartime experiences, particularly regarding any unexplainable phenomena they had witnessed during their missions. There are indications that certain elements within the government became interested in aspects of Thunder Basin that went beyond conventional warfare, Reynolds wrote. Some veterans reported being questioned about indigenous spiritual practices, altered states of consciousness achieved during missions, and inexplicable awareness of enemy locations that couldn't be attributed to physical signs. This line of questioning suggests that some faction within the military or intelligence community may have been exploring what would later be termed psychic warfare, attempts to develop and weaponize extrasensory perception and other parapsychological phenomena. The connection between Thunder Basin and later classified programs like Project Stargate, which investigated psychic phenomena for military applications during the Cold War, remains circumstantial but provocative. Several key researchers involved in these later programs had previously served in military intelligence units with access to Thunder Basin reports. The Indigenous Commandos weren't just effective because of physical skills, explained Robert Threebears. They operated from a different understanding of reality, one where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were not as rigid as in Western thinking. This made them capable of things that conventional soldiers would consider impossible. Could this different way of perceiving reality have attracted the attention of military researchers looking for advantages in the escalating Cold War? Did some Thunder Basin veterans become subjects, willing or unwilling, in classified experiments exploring the outer edges of human perception. The files remain sealed, but testimonies from family members suggest that some veterans struggled with unexplained psychological trauma that went beyond conventional combat stress, describing experiences of having their spirits tampered with or their medicine stolen by government researchers. In 1968, first series of unusual deaths among Thunder Basin veterans prompted concerns within the indigenous communities. 4 former operatives died within a 6-month period, all from seemingly natural causes, yet all had reported being contacted by government representatives shortly before their deaths. Tribal elders from several nations conducted their own investigation, reaching out through traditional networks to gather information that official channels wouldn't provide. Their conclusions, preserved in oral tradition rather than written records, suggested that something had gone wrong with certain aspects of the Thunder Basin knowledge, that techniques meant for protection and defense had been twisted toward darker purposes. The elders believed that some of the sacred knowledge shared during Thunder Basin had been misused, explained Jennifer Two Rivers. In our traditions, certain knowledge comes with responsibility and spiritual protocols. When these are ignored, there are consequences, not just for those who misuse the knowledge, but for those who shared it. This perspective offers a different interpretation of the mysterious deaths and disappearances, not as a Soviet campaign against former operatives or even as government silencing of inconvenient witnesses, but as the natural consequence of spiritual boundaries being crossed. For most Western observers, such explanations lie outside the boundaries of acceptable historical analysis. Yet for the descendants of Thunder Basin operators, they represent an essential aspect of the story that cannot be separated from the tactical achievements or classified missions. Perhaps the most tangible legacy of Thunder Basin today lies not in classified military programs or unacknowledged European operations, but in the revitalization of indigenous warrior traditions that the program inadvertently supported. Thunder Basin showed that our traditional ways had value even in modern warfare, explained Mark Standing Bear, who leads a program teaching indigenous youth traditional skills on the Pine Ridge Reservation. When our veterans came home, many of them began quietly teaching these skills again, preserving knowledge that was in danger of being lost. Across Indian country today, cultural revitalization programs often include elements of traditional warrior training, not to prepare for war, but to instill the discipline, environmental awareness, and spiritual groundedness that characterized indigenous warriors throughout history. The warrior tradition isn't primarily about fighting, Standing Bear emphasized. It's about protection of the community, the land, the traditional ways. Thunder Basin recognized the value of these traditions in a limited way, focusing on their tactical applications, but the deeper wisdom lies in understanding that a true warrior's greatest strength comes from spiritual connection and responsibility to something larger than oneself. As the sun sets over the Rocky Mountains, somewhere in those remote valleys, the echoes of Thunder Basin remain. The facility itself has been reclaimed by nature, its structures deliberately dismantled or allowed to decay back into the earth. Official maps still obscure its true location with misleading topographical features. The full operational records remain classified, locked away in secure government archives. But the knowledge lives on, in the families who kept the stories alive through generations of secrecy, in the special operations units that still utilize techniques pioneered by those indigenous warriors, and in the renewed interest in traditional skills among indigenous youth who may never know the classified history that helped preserve their ancestral wisdom. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the legacy of Thunder Basin offers a profound lesson about the nature of true strength. In their darkest hour, facing an enemy of unprecedented technological capability and ruthless determination, America turned to its most oppressed peoples and the ancient wisdom they carried. That wisdom, born of thousands of years living in harmony with the most challenging environments on the continent, preserved through generations of resistance against attempts to eradicate indigenous cultures, provided capabilities that no modern military training could replicate. As we navigate our own challenging times, perhaps we would do well to remember the Thunder Basin lesson that sometimes the knowledge we most desperately need is not found in our latest innovations or most advanced technologies, but in wisdom we nearly lost, carried by peoples whose voices we have too often silenced. The Indigenous Commandos who trained in those remote Rocky Mountain valleys did more than defeat a military enemy. They preserved a way of seeing and being in the world that offers healing possibilities for the spiritual wounds of our modern age. Their greatest legacy may not be the classified missions they completed, but the reminder that different ways of knowing and being have value beyond what our conventional frameworks can measure. As one Thunder Basin veteran reportedly told his grandson, "We didn't win because we had better weapons or more men. We won because we remembered what they had forgotten, that we are not separate from the world around us, that true strength comes from harmony rather than domination, and that the Creator placed us here not as conquerors, but as protectors of all life." In these words lies perhaps the most important lesson of the Thunder Basin story, one that speaks not just to military strategy or classified history, but to the fundamental challenges facing humanity today. May we have the wisdom to hear it and the courage to follow where it leads. For as Scripture reminds us, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. The ancient wisdom that saved the world once may be called upon to do so again. The question is whether we will remember the lesson of Thunder Basin, that sometimes to move forward, we must first look back to the wisdom we nearly lost.